In the scorching heat of Red Hollow, Arizona, no one realizes the danger lurking beneath the cracked desert floor. No one except a young woman fighting alone to keep her family's land. Eleanor Vance has survived hurricanes, drought, and loneliness sharper than broken glass, but nothing could prepare her for the night an old Jeep crawled out of the dust, with a scarred stranger at the wheel, and an aging canine German shepherd who refused to stop staring into her well as if sensing a secret no other eye could see. The townspeople who tried to take her water thought she was helpless. They thought she had no allies. They thought she wouldn't fight back. They were wrong, because the storm wasn't her enemy. It was her warning. Please like and follow us to know the result of this dispute. What lesson it will bring to each of us. Will we accept it or condemn it? The desert wind rose early that evening, dragging long ribbons of sand across Red Hollow's cracked earth, as if the land itself were being erased, grain by grain. Eleanor Vance stood alone beside the old wooden fence that marked the edge of her family's property, her boots half buried in ochre dust. 26 years old, she carried the wiry strength of someone raised on land that demanded more from its people than it ever returned. She was tall, slender, but resilient, with sun-bronzed skin earned from years of repairing solar panels under pitiless heat. Her dark chestnut hair, once long, was now cut to her shoulders in uneven layers she had trimmed herself, and it whipped around her sharp, observant face. Her eyes, a muted gray-green, carried a constant tension, as if always bracing for something to go wrong. And lately, everything had. The storm was coming earlier than expected. She could smell the metallic tang of the shifting dust. It reminded her of being 10 years old, clinging to her father's coat while he boarded up the windows as another storm rolled in. He had told her, "Weather tells you when it's angry, people don't." Those words clung to her years later, especially now that the threat to her land came not from nature but from the men who coveted what little water the Vance family still possessed. She wiped the back of her hand across her forehead, smearing a streak of sand against her skin. Her throat tightened with a fear she refused to voice. The solar panels were failing again, 3 cracked, 1 dead entirely, and her water pump sputtered every time the pressure dipped. She had learned to fix everything on her own since her father died and her mother left, unable to face the loneliness of Red Hollow. That loneliness, however heavy, had never driven Eleanor away. This land was all she had left, and she clung to it as fiercely as the desert clung to its secrets. In the distance, a truck engine sputtered, then cut off abruptly. Eleanor stiffened. She knew that sound too well. Jonah Creedy, one of the men who believed the land's water belonged to the town, by which he meant himself and the 2 other rough-edged opportunists he called friends. They weren't from Red Hollow originally. None of them had roots deeper than a shallow promise. But they had a hunger for control that made them dangerous. Eleanor forced herself to stay still. Maybe he was only passing through. Maybe tonight, for once, she might be left alone. But hope was a fragile thing out here. Jonah's silhouette soon emerged from behind a cloud of sand. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, with a thick blonde beard that never seemed fully cleaned and eyes that narrowed with suspicion at anything that resisted him. He had the body of someone who had done physical labor all his life, but the arrogance of someone who believed that gave him ownership of anything he touched. A faded flannel shirt clung to his torso, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked by old burns and scars, evidence of fights he said were accidents, though everyone knew better. "Evening, Ellie," he called out, his voice carrying an oily friendliness that made her stomach tighten. She hated when he shortened her name. "It's Eleanor," she replied, keeping her tone icy. He smirked, stopping just close enough that she could smell the gasoline on his clothes. "Storm's getting bad. Roads'll wash out soon." "It's a sandstorm, Jonah," she said. "Nothing washes." He chuckled, the sound low and amused at his own joke. "You always were too serious. Listen, I came by to check that pump." Folks in town say your well's runnin' high. Would be a shame if the pressure burst and wasted all that good water." Eleanor's pulse spiked. The lie in his words was so thin it might as well have been transparent. "The pump is fine," she said, "and the well isn't your business." Jonah tilted his head, the smile dropping from his lips. His eyes hardened, revealing the man he truly was, someone who believed pressure could make anyone bend. "Everything in this valley's our business." A gust of wind sliced between them, whipping sand into her face. She didn't flinch. He waited for her to back down. She refused. The desert groaned as the storm thickened, shadows smearing into one another. Jonah finally stepped away, but not before leaning close enough for his whisper to cut colder than the rising wind. "You can't hold this place forever, Eleanor. People like you break." She didn't move until his truck rattled back onto the dirt road and disappeared into the storm. Only then did she allow herself to breathe, shallow and trembling. A thread of fear wound around her ribs, but beneath it, something else began to tighten. Resolve. She turned toward the well, placing her palm on the battered metal casing, as if reassuring an old friend. "They won't take you," she murmured, "not while I can still stand." As the first wall of sand slammed into Red Hollow, Eleanor braced herself, feeling the land tremble beneath her boots. She knew she was fighting a losing battle, but it was hers and she wouldn't let go. The last traces of daylight bled into a bruised horizon as the battered Jeep Wrangler crawled along the dirt road leading into Red Hollow. Its faded silver paint was chipped from years of harsh deployments and harder roads, and every loose bolt shivered in the rising wind. Inside, gripping the wheel with knuckles pale beneath desert dust, sat Silas Merrick, 39 years old, tall and broad-shouldered in a way that suggested both strength and weariness, lived in him at equal measure. His jaw was angular, edged with a few days of dark stubble that shadowed his face, and a long scar cut diagonally beneath his right cheekbone, a mark from a mission no one spoke about anymore. His eyes, a deep steel blue, carried a heaviness that came from seeing things men were never meant to witness. Those eyes rarely softened now, except when they flicked toward the passenger seat. There lay Griffin, his retired German Shepherd K9, nearly 8 years old, but still imposing. Griffin's fur was thick and dark, marbled with streaks of gray along his neck and muzzle, age and battles etched into him like weather patterns on stone. His ears twitched constantly, alert even in rest, while his amber eyes held both intelligence and exhaustion. He trusted only Silas, and the world outside the Jeep remained something he evaluated with suspicion and old pain. Silas reached over and brushed a hand along the dog's broad head. "Easy, boy, we're almost there." Griffin huffed softly but didn't lift his head. The dog sensed something, or someone, as the storm rolled toward them. The sandstorm was swelling behind them like a living thing, a towering wall of dust that threatened to erase the road entirely. Red Hollow wasn't supposed to be this harsh so early in the season, but storms didn't follow rules here. They never had. As the Jeep creaked forward, Silas slowed when he spotted a sagging wooden gate in the distance. He felt a pull into his chest, a strange tug of intuition he didn't trust but never ignored. Griffin lifted his head fully now, ears rising like antennae. He stared ahead, muscles tightening beneath his coat. "What is it?" Silas murmured, though he sensed the answer. Someone was there, someone afraid. He pressed the brakes gently as the Jeep rolled to a stop. Through the haze of swirling dust, a figure emerged. Eleanor Vance, standing beside the cracked fence line with her posture stiff and defensive, as if she expected the world to crash down on her at any moment. Her chestnut hair whipped wildly in the storm wind, framing the sharp lines of her face. Her clothing, patched and sun-worn, clung to her frame as she raised one hand to shield her eyes. She didn't look helpless. She looked cornered. Silas stepped out of the Jeep, boots sinking into sand. Griffin jumped out beside him, landing with a quiet thud, his stance low but ready. He sniffed the air sharply, tail stiffened, Eleanor backed up half a step, not in fear, but in calculation. A woman alone in the desert didn't survive this long by trusting easily. Silas raised his voice above the wind. "Storm's closing in fast. You need help?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She studied him, his height, the scars on his face, the way he positioned himself between her and the storm without seeming aware of it. She noticed too how Griffin stayed by his side, not aggressive, but alert, with a soldier's discipline rather than a wild dog's unpredictability. Finally, she spoke, tone steady but wary. "I'm fine, just trying to keep things together before the worst of it hits." Silas glanced at the property behind her. Broken solar panels, flickering porch light, the weary structure of a house clinging to life just like its owner. "Looks like you've had a hell of a day," he said. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "More like a hell of a year." As she spoke, Griffin's ears pricked toward the well behind the house. He stepped forward slightly, nose raised, then let out a low rumble deep in his throat, not a warning, but recognition of something off. Eleanor saw his reaction and instinctively moved closer to the dog, though she kept a cautious distance. "What's wrong with him?" "He senses things," Silas replied, "things most people ignore." Eleanor hesitated, then exhaled as if surrendering to a truth she hated. "Someone was here earlier, Jonah Creedy." Silas didn't know the name, but the tightened muscles in her neck told him everything he needed. Trouble, the kind that didn't leave when asked. He rested one hand lightly on Griffin's harness. "Did he threaten you?" Eleanor shook her head, though her eyes betrayed the lie. "Not directly. But he will," Silas said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor looked at him sharply, surprised at how easily he understood. But Silas had spent his life reading danger in the spaces where words failed. He wasn't wrong. The storm screamed louder, sand whipping around them in sheets. Eleanor's gaze flicked to the jeep, then back to Silas. "Why are you here?" she asked. Silas seemed unsure for a moment, almost as if the real answer might unravel him. "Passing through," he finally said, "looking for quiet." Eleanor gave a humorless half-laugh. "Red Hollow isn't quiet anymore." Griffin nudged Silas's leg, uneasy. The storm was nearly upon them. Silas met Eleanor's eyes. "If you want, we can wait it out inside. Storm like this can tear roofs off trucks, flip 'em too." Eleanor hesitated again, but she wasn't reckless. She nodded once. "Fine, but just until the storm passes." As they walked toward the house, Griffin suddenly trotted ahead, nose to the ground, following a scent that made his tail stiffen again. Eleanor froze. "What's he doing?" Silas moved beside her, watching the dog closely. "Following a trail." "A trail of what?" Eleanor asked. Silas didn't answer. Griffin stopped at the well's edge, growling low, body rigid. Eleanor's face drained of color. Something was wrong with the well, more wrong than she'd realized. The storm roared over them, drowning the land in a curtain of sand, as Silas stepped closer to the well and whispered, "Whatever Jonah did, Griffin can smell it." And Eleanor understood, with a cold, sinking certainty, that the battle for her land had already begun. The storm had swallowed Red Hollow in a suffocating veil of dust, turning the world into a blur of shifting shadows. Eleanor led Silas through the thickening wind toward the well, her hand shielding her gray-green eyes. Sand bit at her sun-bronzed skin, stinging like needles, but she pressed on. Silas followed closely behind, his tall, broad frame cutting a path through the gale, while Griffin trotted ahead with a rigid determination that tightened the air around them. The German shepherd's dark fur rippled with each gust, gray streaks catching the dim porch light as he lowered his head to the ground. His nose twitched sharply, then his whole body went still. Eleanor stopped short, her boots grinding into the dust. "Why did he—" "Griffin!" Her voice cracked with unease. The dog let out a low, vibrating growl, muscles coiling beneath his thick coat. He took several deliberate steps toward the far side of the well, where the earth had begun to split into long fissures from months of drought. Then, without warning, Griffin lunged forward and disappeared into a shallow depression in the ground. Eleanor gasped. She ran after him, but Silas's hand shot out, catching her wrist with surprising gentleness, yet unshakable firmness. "Wait," he said, his voice steady but edged with alertness. "He's tracking something." Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. The storm's howl muted beneath the pounding in her ears. "Tracking what? It's just dry dirt. He's never reacted like this before." Silas released her wrist and stepped down into the depression after the dog. The ground here was softer, sandy debris piled unnaturally high. Griffin dug furiously, throwing sand into the air with powerful strokes of his paws. Within seconds, the dog exposed something metallic, thin, rust-colored, running horizontal beneath the soil, like some buried vein. Silas knelt, brushing dirt aside with broad, calloused hands. Eleanor crouched beside him, breath tight. "What is that?" she asked. "A feeder pipe," Silas murmured. His steel-blue eyes darkened, shadowed by memory. "Industrial grade, not something you find on a ranch." Eleanor felt a cold wave move through her, colder than any desert night. How deep does it go?" Silas followed the pipe with his hands until it disappeared into another crack in the ground. "Far enough, and it's recent. Someone dug this within the last few weeks." "Jonah," Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking. "He and his men, they've been coming by more often. I knew they wanted the well, but—" Silas put a hand on her shoulder, a brief grounding gesture. "This isn't petty theft. This is a siphoning system, designed to pull water from your well and divert it." "Divert it where?" Griffin answered before Silas could. The dog lifted his head suddenly, ears erect, then moved toward another fissure, a wider one, where the earth had crumbled earlier in the season. He barked once, short and urgent, then glanced back at Silas. "He wants you to follow," Eleanor said, rising on unsteady legs. Silas nodded. "Then we follow." They pushed through the storm, Griffin guiding them like a soldier on a mission he'd never forgotten. The fissure led them behind the barn, where the soil had collapsed into a narrow trench. Eleanor hadn't thought much of it before, just another mark of the drought, but now, with Griffin's focus sharpening, she saw it differently. Silas jumped down first, boots thudding softly in the shallow trench. He ran one hand along the inner wall of the crack. The dirt gave way easily, revealing another pipe, this one thicker, newer, the metal unmarred by rust. He scowled. "This one's active," he said. "Pressurized." Eleanor's throat tightened. Meaning someone is pumping water out of your land right now." The ground trembled, not violently, but enough that all three of them felt it. Griffin bristled, tail rigid, his amber eyes sharp and unwavering. Eleanor's breath caught. "Silas, this could drain the entire well." "And not just yours," Silas said grimly. "If they've tapped into the aquifer from multiple access points, Red Hollow could run dry within months." A sudden gust of wind broke over them, and Eleanor staggered. Silas grabbed her arm to steady her. She was shaking, not from the cold wind, but from betrayal, fear, and a rage she had been suppressing for far too long. "They're stealing everything my family built," she said, voice cracking. "My father worked this land until it killed him, and they think they can just take it because no one will stop them." Silas looked at her, not with pity, but with understanding carved from his own ghosts. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. Before either of them could say another word, a figure appeared through the storm haze at the top of the ridge, thin, wiry, wearing a dark windbreaker pulled tight against the wind. He moved awkwardly, as though uncertain of his footing, and carried a flashlight that flickered weakly in the sand-choked air. Eleanor flinched back. Who is that?" Silas raised a hand, motioning her to stay behind him. Griffin stood between them, teeth bared, the fur along his spine rising like a ridge. The figure approached slowly until his features became visible, a narrow face with sallow skin, sunken eyes, and patchy stubble that looked more accidental than intentional. His hair was stringy and blonde, tied loosely at the back. Silas stepped forward. "Identify yourself." The man coughed, covering his mouth with a trembling hand. "Name's Carter Mallon." His voice was thin and hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken to another human in days. I live down by the Red Hollow crossing." Eleanor frowned through the storm. "I've never seen you." "You wouldn't," Carter said, shifting nervously. "I keep to myself." Silas studied him carefully. Carter was in his early 40s, lean to the point of appearing malnourished, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. His clothes were worn, knees torn, boots cracked, and he avoided eye contact the way traumatized men often did. "What are you doing here?" Silas asked. Carter glanced at the trench, then at Eleanor, then at Griffin. I came to warn you." He swallowed hard. "Creedy and his boys. They're not just stealing water, they're planning to run a line straight out to the old quarry. They've already started moving equipment." Silas's jaw clenched. "Why tell us?" Carter lowered his gaze, shame tightening his posture. "Because I helped them dig the first line." Eleanor inhaled sharply, fury boiling in her chest. "But I didn't know what they were doing," Carter added quickly. "Not at first. When I realized, I walked out. They told me they'd come after me if I said anything." Silas exchanged a look with Eleanor. They didn't fully trust Carter, but his fear was real, his trembling more than cold. And what he said fit perfectly with what Griffin had found. The storm howled again, rattling the metal pipes beneath their feet. Silas placed a steadying hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "This isn't just about your well," he said. "It's a coordinated operation." Eleanor tightened her jaw. "Then we stop it." Griffin barked sharply, once, decisive, like a soldier signaling readiness. And as the storm finally peaked, drowning Red Hollow in roaring darkness, the truth beneath the cracked earth bound them together in a single undeniable realization. The fight had already begun, and none of them could turn back now. Night settled over Red Hollow like a vast sheet of cooling metal, the heat of the day fading into a dry chill that crept through the broken boards of Eleanor's barn and rattled loose nails on the porch. The storm had quieted to a low growl, the dust thinning just enough for the moon to bleed through in faint silver streaks. Yet the silence that lingered in the valley was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something waiting to strike. Eleanor stood near the well with her arms wrapped around herself, not out of cold, but out of a tension that had rooted deep beneath her ribs. Her chestnut hair, still dusty from the storm, framed her sharp features, a contrast to her gray-green eyes that scanned the darkness for any movement. She kept replaying Carter's words, the tremble in his voice, the shadows behind his fear. She believed him now. The lines beneath her land were not the end, they were the beginning. Silas stood a few feet in front of her, tall and broad, his posture firm and grounded like a man who had seen the darkest corners of the world and learned to stand anyway. The dim porch light illuminated the angular planes of his face, his unshaven jaw, the scar beneath his right cheekbone. His steel blue eyes were narrowed, focused on the dusty road leading to the property. Beside him, Griffin stood as if carved from stone, ears sharp, tail low, dark fur bristling in the cool wind. His aging but formidable frame looked even larger under the moonlight, and the gray streaks along his muzzle gave him the commanding presence of a veteran ready for one more fight. Carter Mallon remained inside the house. Silas had insisted. The man was too shaken to be useful and too fragile to be out here. For all his cowardice, he had risked much to warn them. Eleanor didn't hate him for his weakness. She hated Jonah for turning men like Carter into shadows of themselves. A crunch of tires against gravel snapped the stillness. Eleanor's breath caught. Silas shifted one foot subtly, grounding himself. Griffin lowered into a tense stance, the low rumble beginning in his chest, vibrating through the air. Headlights pierced the darkness. A truck rolled up the path, battered, loud, its grille wrapped with wire and patched metal. Eleanor recognized it instantly. Jonah Creedy, and he wasn't alone. 3 silhouettes stepped out, their boots kicking up dust. Jonah was in front, his broad shoulders blocking the others behind him. His thick blonde beard glinted under the headlights. His pale eyes twitched with the restless aggression of a man who mistook intimidation for power. He scanned the property, then rested his gaze on Eleanor, long enough to make the anger in her chest flare. One of the men behind him was unfamiliar, tall but hunched slightly, wearing a stained denim jacket, with thin black hair tied into a short knot. His face was narrow and pinched, his expression twitchy, like someone always expecting trouble. His name, as Silas would later learn, was Drew Halcott, a drifter who followed Jonah around because fear was easier than loneliness. The third was someone Eleanor knew too well, Wade Lorne, thick-necked, with dark hair shaved short and a jaw shadowed by a week-old beard. He had the look of a man who'd spent years working with his hands and hurting people with them too. His eyes carried a cold emptiness that suggested kindness had been beaten out of him long ago. Jonah stepped forward. "Evening, Eleanor." His voice was slick, stretched thin with annoyance. "Seems you've been busy in the dirt. You found our little irrigation project?" Silas didn't move from his place in front of her. "It's not irrigation, it's theft." Jonah tilted his head, amused. "You must be the drifter people saw heading this way. Thought this ranch was off limits to visitors." "Storm changed my plans," Silas said. His voice stayed calm, but there was steel beneath it. "But your plans end tonight." Jonah barked a short laugh. Wade and Drew tensed behind him, waiting for instruction. "You think you're going to stop us? This land's been dying since before she was born." He jerked his head toward Eleanor. "We're just taking what's going to waste." "You're draining an entire aquifer," Eleanor shot back. "You'll kill this valley." "Valley's dying anyway," Jonah said. "Might as well make money before it does." Before Silas could respond, Griffin stepped forward, letting out a sudden sharp bark that cut through the conversation like a blade. Drew flinched. Wade stiffened. Jonah took a half step back despite himself. Silas's voice was quiet, lethal. "That dog served 2 tours in combat. He knows what men like you smell like." Griffin held his ground, ears thrust forward, amber eyes locked onto Jonah. The air tightened. Jonah straightened his shoulders, trying to reclaim the power he had lost in that single bark. "We're here to finish what we started. That well is ours." "No," Silas said. "It's not." Jonah motioned for Wade to move toward the well. Wade took 1 step, and Griffin lunged, not to attack, but to block, planting himself directly in Wade's path with a snarl that vibrated through the ground. Wade froze, instinct overriding bravado. Silas's voice cracked through the night like a command detonating. "Back off." There was something in his tone, authority sharpened by years of giving orders in life or death moments. Wade stumbled backward. Drew hesitated, trembling. Jonah's lips curled. Silas reached into his pocket and lifted his phone, not as a threat, but as evidence. "You're done here. I've recorded everything. Your pipes, your attempt to trespass, your intent to damage property." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Who do you think will care? Sheriff's office doesn't give a damn." "Maybe," Silas replied, "but the county water authority will." Jonah stiffened. "What did you—" Before he could finish, headlights flashed across the road. Another vehicle pulled up, white and marked with county insignia. 2 deputies stepped out, their uniforms stiff from dust, radios crackling. One was a stocky man in his 50s with a graying mustache. The other a younger woman with strict posture and sharp brown eyes. The older deputy, Deputy Rovner, spoke first. "Got a call about illegal siphoning equipment." He glanced at Silas's phone, then at the pipes exposed near the trench. "Looks like the complaint was valid," Jonah sputtered. "This is a misunderstanding." "Then you won't mind coming with us to clear it up," Rovner said, pulling out cuffs. Wade stepped back. Drew nearly bolted, But Griffin growled once, and they froze like animals pinned beneath a predator's gaze. Minutes later, Jonah and his men were being escorted into the patrol car, shouting protests that dissolved into the storm as it swept over the valley again. The wind picked up, erasing footprints, scattering loose sand into the air. It felt as though the desert itself wanted to bury the night. Silas exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders. Eleanor watched the patrol car vanish into the swirling dust, her chest rising with relief she had not allowed herself to feel for months. Griffin sat beside them, calm now, his tail thumping once against the ground, as if signaling victory, but a quiet, temporary one, because the storm still raged, and the fight for the land was not finished, not yet. Morning came softly to Red Hollow, for the first time in weeks, the sun rising in a pale gold ribbon across the sky as though testing whether the valley was ready to be warmed again. A thin veil of dust lingered in the air, but the storm had finally broken, leaving the desert washed in a strange, muted calm. The house, battered but standing, reflected the glow in its worn windows. Eleanor stood on the porch, one hand resting against a wooden pillar that still carried scratches from the storm's fury. Her chestnut hair, cleaned of grit but still unruly from the desert wind, lifted gently in the early breeze. Her gray-green eyes followed the light stretching over the horizon. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the familiar tension gathering beneath her ribs. A week had passed since Jonah Creedy and his crew were hauled off in the back of a county patrol car. The well had been sealed, the illegal pipes removed under Deputy Rovner's supervision, and the energy system restored, thanks almost entirely to Silas. She glanced to her left, where the tall man knelt beside a panel frame, tightening the last bolt. Silas Merrick looked different in the morning sun. The angular lines of his tired face were softer somehow, no longer sculpted by the reflexive vigilance of a man expecting violence from every direction. The steel blue of his eyes had lightened with the dawn, though his dark stubble and the scar under his cheekbone still lent him the roughened look of someone shaped by hardship. He rose to his full height, wiping dust from his hands. "That should keep these running for a while," he said. His voice carried that steady calm Eleanor had grown strangely accustomed to, solid, unshaken like rock beneath a shifting landscape. "Longer than a while if I don't break them again," Eleanor said with a small laugh, one that surprised her. Silas gave a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. "Panels don't break themselves. Then maybe Red Hollow has it out for me." He shook his head lightly. "No, it's just been waiting for you to have backup." At their feet, Griffin lay sprawled in the patch of shade beneath the lone mesquite tree, massive body relaxed, paws stretched out comfortably. His thick, dark fur glimmered with new life after a bath and rest, though the gray streaks along his muzzle remained like badges of memory. The German shepherd had changed too. The sharp rigidity with which he carried himself in the storm had eased into calm watchfulness. He shifted only when Silas approached, lifting his amber eyes with a loyal softness reserved only for the man who had survived too many battles beside him. Eleanor knelt to scratch behind Griffin's ears. "He looks peaceful," she murmured. "He hasn't looked this peaceful in months," Silas replied, leaning against the railing. "He's earned it." "I think you have too," she said quietly. Silas didn't respond immediately. His gaze drifted across the property, the mended fence, the restored well, the ridges of cracked earth now gleaming faintly under the newborn sunlight. There was gratitude there, but something else too, something heavier. Eleanor noticed. "You're thinking about leaving." Silas exhaled slowly. He didn't deny it. "I wasn't planning to stay this long. I never stay anywhere long." "Because of the job? The missions?" "Not just that." His voice lowered. "Places. People. I don't want to bring trouble to anyone's door." Eleanor stepped closer, the wood creaking softly under her boots. Her sharp features softened. "Silas, you didn't bring trouble. You stopped it." He met her eyes, and for a moment she saw the exhaustion he rarely let show. the weight of years spent running toward danger, and the fear that he might one day bring it to those he tried to protect. Before he could respond, footsteps approached from the barn. Carter Mallon emerged hesitantly, squinting against the sun. His thin frame was less hunched than before, though his tired eyes and unshaven jaw still revealed a man carrying too many sleepless nights. He'd stayed in the small guest room at Eleanor's insistence. Though he spoke little, he had begun to eat, help with chores, and regain some semblance of steadiness. Carter raised a hand awkwardly. Water pumps running smooth now, pressures steady. Eleanor smiled at him, gentle but firm. "Thank you, Carter, really." He nodded, tucking a strand of stringy blonde hair behind his ear. "Feels good to do something right," he said quietly, then retreated back toward the barn, choosing solitude the way a wounded man chooses silence. Silas watched him go. "He'll get there," he said. "I know," Eleanor replied. "We all will." They returned their attention to Griffin, who had rolled onto his side, exposing his chest to the sun with a content huff. The simple joy in the dog's posture warmed Eleanor's heart more than she expected. "He likes it here," she said softly. Silas nodded. "He does." "And you?" The question hung between them like a fragile thread. For a long moment Silas didn't answer. He watched the desert stretching toward the horizon, the golden light deepening over its cracked surface. The land was damaged, scarred, fighting to survive. Yet it was still beautiful, still alive. Finally he said, "I could." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Eleanor breathed out, relieved. A soft breeze drifted across the porch, ruffling her hair, then sweeping gently across Silas before settling on Griffin, who thumped his tail once, a slow, deliberate sound, like a seal of acceptance. The storm that had battered them had taken much: sleep, safety, certainty. But it had also given something back: connection, trust, and a quiet sense of belonging none of them had expected when the sky went dark. Eleanor glanced between Silas and Griffin, two souls scarred by battle, different battles, but wounds all the same, now sitting on her porch as the first true sunrise in weeks spilled across the valley. "Looks like a new start," she said. Silas nodded. "Yeah, maybe it is." On the horizon the sun rose fully, flooding Red Hollow with its first warmer light. The well gleamed. The panels reflected hope instead of struggle, and Griffin closed his eyes, breathing deeply, as if settling into the life he had never imagined, one where peace wasn't something fought for, but something found. And though none of them spoke it aloud, they all felt the same truth. Today the fight was over. Tomorrow the healing would begin. Sometimes the greatest battles of our lives don't happen on faraway front lines, but right here, in the quiet corners of our days, in the places where we feel small, tired, or alone. Eleanor thought the desert had forgotten her. Silas believed peace would never find him again, and Griffin, a soldier of countless storms, carried scars that no one could see. But in Red Hollow, where the winds once howled with fear, something sacred touched their lives. The gentle reminder that God still works through broken people, through unexpected friendships, and through moments that feel too perfectly timed to be coincidence. Maybe the true miracle wasn't the storm passing, but the way hearts opened when it did. Maybe your life too has dry seasons, days when you feel drained, uncertain, or overlooked, days when you wonder if anyone sees your struggle, if God hears your quiet prayers. But just like the dawn that rose over Red Hollow, light always finds its way back, and God sends the right people, sometimes even a loyal dog, to walk beside us when the world feels heavy. So if you're watching this now, wherever you are, may this story remind you, you are never fighting your battles alone. You are seen, you are loved, and God still has miracles left with your name on them.